The relentless summer sun beat down on the dusty main street of Redemption Gulch, a town clinging to the edge of the vast, unforgiving American West in the late 1800s. Heat shimmered off the parched earth, distorting the ramshackle storefronts and the occasional lone rider who passed, a ghostly silhouette against the blazing horizon. For 21-year-old May, every day was a testament to endurance, a slow, steady burn of quiet resignation. Her light pink prairie dress, once a hopeful gift from her mother before the fever took her years ago, was now faded, clinging to her slender frame, powdered with the omnipresent dust that seemed to seep into every pore of existence in this land. Her eyes, dark pools of ancient wisdom and enduring sorrow, constantly scanned the road ahead, a vigilance born of necessity, not choice. Beside her, old man Lee, her father, shuffled with the aimless gait of a man whose spirit had long since been pickled in cheap whiskey and lost hopes. His clothes were threadbare, his face a road map of hard living, etched with lines that were less about age and more about the relentless erosion of self. He mumbled to himself, a low guttural drone that was as familiar to May as the sound of her own heartbeat. He was a man lost, a ship without a rudder, and May, his only child, was the tiny, fragile anchor that prevented him from drifting entirely into the abyss, even as she herself felt the tug of the current. Their journey had been a series of small, desperate migrations, following whispers of opportunity that always seemed to dissolve into dust and disappointment. Each new town offered the same bleak promise, a few days of meager work for old man Lee, quickly followed by the inevitable descent into the dark solace of the saloon. May carried the weight of their world, a silent burden that pressed down on her shoulders, yet she moved with a grace that belied her inner struggle, a resilience that shimmered beneath her quiet exterior. They were headed towards the Rusty Spur, the largest saloon in Redemption Gulch, a beacon for broken men like her father, a place May dreaded with a deep, visceral fear. It was an inevitability, a cruel ritual that played out in every settlement they stumbled into. A sigh, almost imperceptible, escaped her lips, a tiny feather of despair released into the hot, heavy air. She straightened her shoulders, a defiant gesture against the encroaching gloom, her gaze fixed on the swinging doors of the saloon, which seemed to beckon with a siren song only her father could hear. Her heart, a fragile bird, beat a desperate rhythm against her ribs, knowing the night ahead held only shadows and the bitter taste of abandonment. May had learned long ago that in this unforgiving landscape, a woman's strength lay not in loudness, but in the unwavering persistence of her spirit, a silent wellspring of fortitude that refused to run dry, even when all around her seemed to crumble into arid despair. She was a silent witness to her father's self-destruction, her presence a constant, heartbreaking plea for him to return to the man he once was, before the grief of his wife's passing and the harshness of this new world had consumed him entirely. The saloon's interior assaulted May's senses like a wave breaking against a shore, a cacophony of sound and smell that was both familiar and deeply unsettling. The air hung thick with the acrid scent of stale tobacco smoke, cheap whiskey, and unwashed bodies, a suffocating blanket that seemed to cling to her delicate prairie dress. Laughter, coarse and uninhibited, boomed from tables where men, their faces flushed with drink and greed, slammed cards down with a force that vibrated through the sawdust-covered floor. The clinking of glasses, the raucous shouts, the off-key piano, all blended into a dissonant symphony of reckless abandon. May stood near the entrance, a stark contrast to the boisterous scene, her quiet dignity a silent rebuke to the surrounding chaos. Old man Lee, however, seemed to blossom in this environment, his slumped shoulders straightening slightly, a glint of desperate excitement in his eyes as he spotted the card tables. He pulled a few tarnished coins from his pocket, a paltry sum that represented their dwindling hopes, his gaze already glazed over with the promise of false fortune and fleeting oblivion. "Wait for me, May," he slurred, his voice thicker than usual, a deep, gentle rumble like distant thunder, now frayed at the edges by drink. "Just a few hands. Our luck. It must turn." He offered a weak, lopsided smile, a ghost of the comforting presence he once was, before his true self was swallowed by the potent brew of sorrow and alcohol. May merely nodded, her heart sinking like a stone in a vast, cold river. She had heard these promises countless times, each one a fresh wound, a tiny splinter in her already aching soul. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that his luck would not turn, that the coins would vanish as quickly as desert rain, leaving them even emptier than before. Her loneliness had followed her like a shadow for years, a constant companion that whispered doubts into her ear. But in the saloon, surrounded by so many, it felt most acute. She retreated to a shadowed corner, a small, solitary figure amidst the swirling eddy of humanity, her eyes tracing the patterns in the grimy floor, wishing she could disappear, become as invisible as the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light that pierced the gloom. Time stretched, thick and slow, each tick of the unseen clock a hammer blow against her resolve. She watched her father, a silent observer of his slow, deliberate unraveling. He began with a flicker of hope, a few triumphant shouts, but soon the shouts turned to frustrated grumbles, his hands fumbling, his head drooping. The small pile of coins dwindled, disappearing into the greedy hands of other players. Each loss another shard chipped from May's already brittle spirit. She saw the moment the last coin was gone, not in his expression, but in the sudden slump of his shoulders, the way his gaze became fixed and vacant, devoid of even the desperate spark that had brought him here. Then, without a word, without a glance in her direction, Old Man Lee pushed himself away from the table, stumbled towards the bat-wing doors, and vanished into the darkening street, leaving May utterly alone, a solitary bloom in a field of thorns. The swinging doors settled back into place with a soft thud, a sound that echoed like a final pronouncement in May's ears. The clatter of the saloon continued around her, a relentless tide of noise, but now it felt distant, muffled, as if she had suddenly been submerged under water. Her father was gone. Not a goodbye, not even a fleeting acknowledgement of her presence, just a silent, crushing departure that left her gasping for air in a room full of strangers. A profound ache settled in her chest, a familiar pain that had burrowed deep over years of similar disappointments, but tonight it felt sharper, more absolute, like a wound that would never truly heal. She sat motionless, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her knuckles white, a silent testament to the storm raging within her. The vivid descriptions of the saloon's activities, gambling, drinking, socializing, passed by her in a blur of indifference. Her gaze was unfocused, seeing without truly perceiving, her mind a whirlwind of rhetorical questions. What now? Where do we go? Is this truly the end of everything? The concept of being truly abandoned, of having no one to rely on, was not new to May. It was a ghost that had walked beside her since her mother's death. But to have it so starkly, so cruelly confirmed, was a different kind of desolation, a vast, echoing emptiness that threatened to swallow her whole. Around her men laughed, played, and drank, their boisterous existence a stark, almost cruel contrast to her own quiet despair. No one seemed to notice the delicate Chinese woman in the faded pink dress, shrinking further into the shadows, a forgotten ornament in the grand, uncaring theater of the Wild West Saloon. Most patrons were engrossed in their own pursuits, their eyes blind to the silent tragedy unfolding in the corner. It was in this abyss of solitude that May, through the haze of her grief, became dimly aware of a figure standing by the bar, a man who had been watching her for some time. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that held a depth she couldn't quite fathom, a quiet intensity that cut through the general indifference of the room like a sliver of moonlight. He wore the practical, worn clothes of a cowboy, a dark hat pulled low, his presence exuding a quiet strength that felt both formidable and, strangely, reassuring. This was Cole, a man of the frontier whose life had etched lines of experience around his eyes, a man who had seen much of the harshness of the world but had not allowed it to harden his spirit completely. He had observed old man Lee's predictable pattern and May's silent suffering, a tableau he had witnessed countless times in various dusty towns. There was a quiet dignity about her, a resilience beneath the profound sadness that stirred something within him, a sense of protectiveness he rarely allowed himself to feel. Cole moved through the bustling saloon with an unhurried grace, his boots making soft thuds on the sawdust floor, a stark contrast to the chaotic rhythm that pulsed through the room. Each step brought him closer to May, a silent approach that she, lost in her melancholic reflections, only registered when his shadow fell over her. Her head snapped up, her dark eyes wide with a flicker of apprehension meeting his steady gaze. For a long moment neither spoke, the unspoken weight of her situation hanging heavy in the air between them. Cole's presence was a quiet anchor in the stormy sea of her despair, yet an instinctual wariness, born of a lifetime of hardship and distrust, made her guard herself. He was a stranger, a cowboy in a world where strangers often meant trouble, or worse, indifference. She saw the compassion in his eyes, a depth of understanding that surprised her, a stark contrast to the cold scrutiny she usually encountered. "Your father, he left," Cole stated, his voice a low, gentle rumble, like smooth river stones, a sound that carried an unexpected kindness. It wasn't a question, but an observation, devoid of judgment, steeped in a quiet knowing. May flinched, the raw wound of abandonment still fresh, still stinging. She looked away, her gaze flickering to the swinging doors, a silent acknowledgment of the painful truth. He often does," she whispered, her voice barely audible, a fragile thread in the tapestry of saloon noise. The admission was a bitter taste on her tongue, a public unveiling of a private shame she had carried for so long. Cole nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her, a silent testament to his understanding. "You can't stay here," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "It ain't a place for a lady, not alone." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the indifferent faces around them, a subtle warning in his eyes. "I got a small ranch a few miles out. It's quiet, clean. I could use an extra hand, someone to help around the place. There's a cabin, separate from the main house." May looked at him then, truly looked at him, her mind a flurry of fear and desperation. The offer was audacious, unexpected, a lifeline thrown into a raging current. But could she trust him? A cowboy, a stranger, offering shelter to an abandoned Chinese girl? Her internal monologue was a storm of doubts and rhetorical questions. Was this a trick? What did he want? Could she risk trading one unknown peril for another? Yet the alternative was the street, a vast, empty expanse of unforgiving night, a fate far more terrifying than the enigmatic man before her. His face, weathered by sun and wind, seemed honest, his eyes steady and unwavering. It was a gamble, perhaps the biggest she had ever faced, but what other choice did she have? The raw instinct for survival, a fire that had always burned low within her, flared into a desperate plea for safety. After a long, agonizing moment, during which the fate of her entire world seemed to hang in the balance, May gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Thank you," she managed, the words catching in her throat, a fragile whisper against the roaring tide of her fear and burgeoning, hesitant hope. The transition from the clamor of the saloon to the hushed embrace of the summer evening was like stepping from a fever dream into a cool, clear stream. The raucous laughter and the mournful piano strains faded behind them, replaced by the symphony of the prairie. The chirping of crickets, the rustle of dry grasses, and the distant, lonely howl of a coyote, a sound that echoed the emptiness May still carried within her. The air, though still warm from the day's relentless sun, was now soft, carrying the faint, earthy scent of dust and distant sage. Above them, the sky was a vast, velvet canvas, dusted with countless stars that seemed to burn with a fierce, indifferent brilliance, a silent witness to their journey. May walked beside Cole, her steps tentative at first, then gaining a fragile rhythm. The silence between them was not oppressive, but rather a shared space of unspoken understanding, a quiet acknowledgment of the abrupt and monumental shift in her life. She clutched the small, worn satchel that held her meager possessions, her only tangible link to a past that had abruptly, irrevocably dissolved. Each step felt like a step into the unknown, a leap of faith into a darkness both literal and metaphorical. Her mind, still reeling from the events of the evening, grappled with the enormity of Cole's unexpected kindness. Why, she wondered, the rhetorical question a persistent hum in her thoughts. Why would a stranger offer such generosity to someone like me, a solitary figure with nothing to offer in return? Yet there was no hint of expectation or ulterior motive in his silent stride, only a quiet determination that inspired a hesitant trust. Cole, for his part, walked with a purposeful gait, his gaze fixed on the faint outline of the distant hills, his silent presence a sturdy bulwark against the vastness of the night. He was not a man of many words, his thoughts often a landscape as vast and untamed as the prairie itself, but his actions spoke volumes. He had seen enough suffering in this harsh land to recognize genuine despair, and something about May's quiet resilience had stirred a deep, almost forgotten sense of empathy within him, a desire to offer a haven, however small, from the storms of life. As they left the last flickering lights of Redemption Gulch behind, the world seemed to expand, becoming an endless expanse of shadowed plains beneath the watchful eye of the cosmos. May stole a glance at Cole's profile, illuminated by the pale moonlight, and in that moment a fragile, almost imperceptible seed of hope began to unfurl within her, a delicate blossom in the arid desert of her heart. It was not a certainty, but a possibility, a faint promise that perhaps, just perhaps, this new, uncertain path might lead her towards a dawn she had almost given up on ever seeing. The loneliness that had shadowed her for so long now felt a little less heavy, as if a fraction of its immense weight had been quietly, unexpectedly lifted. The journey to Cole's ranch was a quiet procession under the vast, star-strewn canvas of the western sky. The air grew cooler as they distanced themselves from the town, carrying the clean, wild scent of sagebrush and damp earth. May, her small satchel clutched tightly against her chest, walked with a curious mixture of trepidation and a burgeoning, almost imperceptible sense of peace. The vastness of the prairie, initially intimidating in its emptiness, now seemed to offer a different kind of solace, a boundless expanse where her past griefs might finally dissipate into the infinite. Cole, walking a few paces ahead, his silhouette a sturdy sentinel against the shimmering starlight, seemed to understand the delicate balance of her emotions. He offered no forced conversation, no probing questions, allowing her the sacred space to process the seismic shift in her life. His silence was not indifferent. Rather, it was a quiet, respectful presence, a bedrock of calm in her inner storm. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only an hour or so, a faint flickering light appeared in the distance, a beacon in the inky blackness. As they drew closer, the outlines of a small, well-kept ranch began to emerge from the gloom. A sturdy, single-story cabin with a porch, a smaller outbuilding that hinted at a stable, and a few corrals where horses stirred restlessly. The simple honesty of the place, devoid of the crude pretense of Redemption Gulch, resonated deeply within May. It felt like a haven, a quiet promise of stability in a life that had known little but constant flux. Cole gestured towards a smaller, separate cabin, nestled slightly away from the main house. "That'll be yours," he said, his voice softer now, tinged with a quiet warmth. "It's got a stove, a bed, water pump just outside." He pushed open the door, revealing a small, neat room, sparsely furnished but clean, a welcoming contrast to the squalor she had become accustomed to. A fire was already laid in the small hearth, a thoughtful gesture that brought an unexpected warmth to May's chilled heart. A wave of profound exhaustion washed over her, a weariness that went beyond the physical, settling deep into her bones. She placed her satchel on the small, rough-hewn table, her fingers tracing the smooth wood, a silent acknowledgment of the unexpected sanctuary she had found. Cole left her with a simple, "Sleep well, we'll talk in the morning," his words carrying a quiet authority that brooked no argument. As the door closed softly behind him, leaving her in the quiet solitude of the cabin, May allowed herself a moment of pure, unadulterated relief. The vast, unblinking eyes of the prairie stars watched over her, and for the first time in a very long time she felt a fragile sense of safety, a nascent hope blooming in the fertile ground of her weary soul. The journey, a desperate flight from an abandoned saloon, had unexpectedly led her to this quiet, unassuming place, a small island of calm in the vast, turbulent ocean of the Wild West. The morning light, soft and golden, filtered through the single window of the cabin, painting the rough-hewn walls with a gentle glow. May awoke to the unfamiliar silence of the ranch, a stark and welcome contrast to the cacophony of saloon nights and the ever-present hum of her father's despair. For a moment she lay still, allowing the quiet to wash over her, a healing balm to her weary spirit. The small cabin, though simple, felt like a true home for the first time in years, a space entirely her own, free from the shadow of Old Man Lee's sorrow. She rose, stretching limbs that still ached with the lingering tension of the previous night, and stepped outside. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the invigorating scent of pine and distant wildflowers. The ranch in the full light of day was even more welcoming than it had appeared in the moonlight. A handful of chickens pecked diligently in the dust. A lone horse grazed peacefully in a nearby paddock, and beyond, the endless prairie stretched, a tapestry of greens and browns under a vast azure sky. Cole emerged from the main house, carrying 2 steaming mugs, his movements fluid and unhurried. He offered one to May, a silent gesture that spoke volumes. "Coffee," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Strong." May accepted it, her fingers wrapping around the warm ceramic, a small, involuntary smile touching her lips. The simple warmth of the mug in her hands, the rich aroma of the coffee, felt like a profound luxury. They sat on the small porch of the main house, the rising sun warming their faces, and for a long while they drank in silence, the quiet companionship a comforting presence. "I usually start early," Cole finally said, breaking the peaceful quiet, his gaze sweeping over his modest ranch. "Chores, animals, then the fields." He looked at May, his expression kind and open. "You can help with whatever you feel comfortable with. There's always plenty to do. Gardening, mending, cooking." May nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant hills. The prospect of purposeful work, of contributing, was a welcome relief. For so long her existence had been defined by waiting, by silently enduring. Now there was a chance to build, to create, to find a new rhythm. "I can cook," she said, her voice soft but clear, a new strength shimmering beneath its quiet surface. "And I can mend." Her mother had taught her the delicate art of stitching, a skill that now felt like a lifeline, a tangible link to a past that had not been entirely consumed by sorrow. Cole smiled, a genuine, easy smile that transformed his rugged features. Good. My cooking leaves a lot to be desired. The gentle humor in his voice eased a tension May hadn't realized she was still holding. The loneliness that had followed her like a shadow for years seemed to recede, if only a little, in the warmth of his presence and the quiet promise of this new, unexpected beginning. The world, which had seemed so bleak and unyielding just hours before, now held a nascent glow, a faint but definite promise of a different future. Days melted into weeks, each sunrise bringing with it a quiet rhythm that began to mend the frayed edges of May's soul. She found solace in the simple, honest work of the ranch. Her hands, once accustomed to the delicate intricacies of embroidery, now learned the rough pleasure of tilling soil, tending to a small vegetable patch, and mending worn fabrics with sturdy, practical stitches. She discovered a surprising joy in kneading dough for bread, the scent of fresh baking filling the air, a homely fragrance that had been absent from her life for too long. Cole, true to his nature, remained a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. He left her fresh eggs on her cabin porch each morning, ensured the woodpile was always full, and often brought her small, wild bouquets of prairie flowers he found on his rides. These small, unspoken gestures of care slowly, steadily chipped away at the wall of cautious reserve May had built around her heart. She began to observe him more closely, noticing the quiet strength in his movements, the gentle way he handled his horses, the deep furrows of concentration that creased his brow when he worked the fields. His voice, deep and gentle like distant thunder, became a comforting sound, an anchor in her new world. She saw beyond the weathered cowboy exterior to the kind, honorable man beneath, a man whose silence was not emptiness, but a deep reservoir of thought and feeling. One afternoon, while May was mending a torn canvas tarp on the porch of the main house, Cole sat beside her, whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a bird. The rhythmic scrape of his knife was the only sound for a long while. "You miss your home?" he asked, his voice soft, almost a whisper, breaking the peaceful silence. May paused, her needle hovering over the rough fabric. The question, asked with such quiet empathy, reached a place deep within her that she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge. "My mother, she made a beautiful home," May replied, her voice tinged with a delicate, melancholic nostalgia. "Before she died." She rarely spoke of her mother, the grief too raw, too profound. But with Cole, surrounded by the peaceful quiet of his ranch, the words felt safe to utter. "She taught me to sew," May continued, her fingers unconsciously stroking the fabric, "to find beauty in small things." Cole nodded, his eyes fixed on the bird taking shape under his skilled hands. "She sounds like a good woman." "She was," May affirmed, a faint, tender smile gracing her lips. "And my father, he was different then, before the loneliness consumed him." She looked at Cole, a silent plea for understanding in her dark eyes. He met her gaze, his own eyes holding a depth of empathy that resonated with her own unspoken sorrows. "Grief can do strange things to a man," he said, his voice low, reflective, hinting at his own unspoken losses. "It can either break him or make him stronger." In that shared moment of quiet understanding, a new kind of connection began to forge between them, a fragile but powerful bond woven from shared sorrow and the quiet strength they found in each other's presence. May realized that she was not just an abandoned girl found by a kind stranger. She was becoming a part of something new, something that offered healing, a quiet promise of belonging in a world that had once felt so utterly indifferent. The summer matured, its heat intensifying, but the ranch felt like an oasis, a haven where life unfolded with a gentle rhythm. May, no longer a hesitant guest, had fully integrated herself into the daily routines, her presence bringing an unexpected light and order to Cole's solitary life. She had learned to ride a horse, feeling the exhilarating freedom of the wind in her hair as she helped Cole round up stray cattle. Her laughter, once a rare and fragile sound, now echoing across the open plains. Her hands, once accustomed to the delicate intricacies of embroidery, now expertly handled the sturdy reins, her spirit unfurling like a wildflower reaching for the sun. The cabin, her sanctuary, became a place of comfort and quiet industry. She filled it with the simple beauty of her presence, arranging wildflowers in a tin cup, keeping it spotlessly clean, and leaving small, hand-stitched tokens on Cole's porch, a neatly mended shirt, a small sachet of dried lavender. These silent offerings were her way of expressing a gratitude that words could not fully capture, a profound appreciation for the unexpected kindness that had reshaped her world. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and soft violet, Cole found May sitting on the porch of the main house, a small, leather-bound journal open on her lap. She was sketching a delicate prairie flower, her brow furrowed in concentration. He sat beside her, the familiar, comfortable silence settling between them. "That's beautiful," he murmured, his gaze resting on her drawing, then shifting to her profile, softened by the twilight. May looked up, a soft blush rising on her cheeks. "It helps me remember," she confessed, her voice a little softer than usual, "to hold on to the beauty, even when things are difficult." She then gestured towards the journal, a small, worn volume she always kept close. "My mother, she started this. She believed in recording the quiet joys, the small miracles." Cole reached out, his calloused finger gently tracing the faded cover of the journal. "A good way to live." Their eyes met, and in that moment something profound shifted between them. The unspoken understanding that had grown steadily over the weeks now bloomed into a deeper, more resonant connection. It was not a sudden, dramatic spark, but the gentle, inevitable unfolding of two souls recognizing a shared longing for belonging, for connection, for a home found not just in a place, but in another person. The melancholic undertone that had always accompanied May, a subtle echo of her past sorrows, began to recede, replaced by a radiant hope that shone from within her. The world, which had once seemed so vast and indifferent, now felt intimate and full of promise, a testament to the transformative power of unexpected kindness. The turning point, though subtle, was as profound as the shifting seasons on the prairie. It came not with a dramatic declaration, but in a shared vulnerability, a moment when the carefully constructed walls around their hearts crumbled, revealing the yearning beneath. One scorching afternoon, a sudden, fierce dust storm swept across the plains, an elemental fury that turned the bright day into a swirling, choking maelstrom of ochre and gray. May and Cole were caught outside, tending to a fence line miles from the ranch. The force of the wind was staggering, whipping dust into their eyes and mouths, making it impossible to see or even breathe easily. In the terrifying chaos, Cole, without a moment's hesitation, pulled May close, shielding her with his own body, his strong arms a protective fortress against the onslaught. Her face pressed against his chest, she could hear the steady, reassuring beat of his heart, a rhythm of calm amidst the storm's violent crescendo. The scent of dust and leather and man enveloped her, a scent that was suddenly, profoundly comforting. She felt his strength, his unwavering determination to keep her safe, and in that moment the last vestiges of her fear, the deep-seated apprehension that had always guarded her heart, dissolved like dust in the wind. When the storm finally abated, leaving behind a world hushed and still, covered in a fine, powdery film, they stood together, breathing heavily, their faces streaked with grime. Cole's hands lingered on her shoulders, his gaze searching hers, an unasked question in his eyes. "Are you all right, May?" he asked, his voice a little hoarse, but filled with a tenderness that made her heart ache with a sweet, unfamiliar pain. "Yes," she whispered, her voice equally unsteady, her own hands now resting gently on his arms. because of you. In the quiet aftermath, surrounded by the vast, humbled landscape, the truth of their connection, a bond forged in shared hardship and unwavering protection, lay bare between them. The rhetorical questions that had once filled May's mind, was this real? Could she truly trust? Faded into the distant echoes of a past life. This was real. This was a man who saw her, truly saw her, and would stand by her. Cole then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden bird, the one he had been whittling. He placed it gently in her hand. "For you," he said, his eyes conveying a depth of feeling that words could not contain. "A symbol of hope, flying free." May looked at the tiny bird, then back at Cole, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Tears not of sorrow, but of profound gratitude and a burgeoning, undeniable love. "I've been waiting my whole life for you," she confessed, her voice choked with emotion, the words an honest echo of a longing she had never dared to voice, a truth that had been quietly blooming in her heart. He simply held her gaze, a silent promise in his eyes, a mirroring of her own profound realization. The wind, now a gentle whisper, carried their unspoken vows across the vast, open plains, a testament to a love that had found its roots in the barren soil of abandonment and blossomed in the warmth of shared humanity. The years that followed unfolded like a cherished journal, each page filled with the quiet joys and enduring strength of a love that had found its home on the vast, open prairie. May and Cole, no longer solitary figures navigating a harsh world alone, built a life together on the ranch, a testament to resilience, kindness, and the profound power of connection. The small cabin, once May's sanctuary, became a vibrant hub of shared laughter and quiet conversations, filled with the aroma of her baking and the gentle hum of their contented lives. She continued to tend her garden, its blossoms brighter, its yield more abundant, a metaphor for the flourishing life she now led. Cole, still a man of quiet demeanor, found his voice in the warmth of May's presence, sharing stories of the range, his laughter now more frequent, echoing with a joy he had long thought lost. Their days were a tapestry of shared labor and unspoken understanding. They worked the land together, their hands calloused, their spirits intertwined. May learned to mend fences, to herd cattle, her movements graceful and sure, her earlier fragility replaced by a quiet strength that emanated from within. Cole, in turn, learned the delicate art of listening, of seeing the world through May's eyes, finding beauty in the smallest details she pointed out, the intricate pattern of a spider's web, the vibrant hues of a sunset, the enduring tenacity of a desert bloom. The wooden bird Cole had carved for her held a place of honor on their mantelpiece, a constant reminder of the day their two paths irrevocably converged, a symbol of hope and freedom. May continued to write in her mother's journal, but now the entries were filled not just with memories of the past, but with the vibrant present, detailing the quiet miracles of their shared life, the strength of Cole's hand in hers, the peace she found in his steady gaze. She recorded the changing seasons on the ranch, the birth of new calves, the first harvest from their fields, all imbued with the deep satisfaction of a life truly lived, truly shared. Their love was not a tempestuous, dramatic affair, but a deep, abiding current, flowing steadily through the landscape of their days. It was a love built on respect, on shared values, on the quiet understanding that comes from weathering storms together and finding solace in each other's presence. The melancholic shadow that had once clung to May, a heavy cloak of past sorrows, had finally lifted, replaced by a radiant inner peace, a joy that sparkled in her dark eyes. The rhetorical questions of doubt and fear that had once plagued her mind were silenced, replaced by a profound certainty. She had found not just a home, but a partner, a true companion in the vast, beautiful wilderness of life. The prairie, once a symbol of her loneliness, now stretched before them as a testament to their enduring love, an endless horizon promising a future filled with contentment, a peaceful and fulfilling journey, hand in hand towards whatever lay beyond.